So I was chained to the basketball court for a few minutes before they finally realized something was amiss. And at this point, this had been on national television. Hundreds of thousands of people had already seen it. When I was 11 years old, I founded my own nonprofit organization called Happy Hen Animal Sanctuary. And we started this organization by rescuing 12 hens from a factory egg farm. And these are some of those 12 hens. And I remember bringing these hens home. They spent their entire lives in battery cages, which are cages so small that they're actually now illegal in the state of California. And when we brought them home, I watched them look around in awe. And I knew that my life would never be the same. I knew that my life would forever be dedicated to getting as many of these animals as possible out of this industry and to animal sanctuaries so that every animal could experience this moment of awe as they saw the world around them for the first time. Prior to being rescued, these hens, all they'd ever known, I don't know why it's skipping a page every time. Oh, I think that's the problem. Prior to being rescued, all these hens had ever known was a dark factory farm. And when we rescued them, they felt dirt for the first time. They saw the sky for the first time. They felt the sun on their backs for the first time. Prior to being rescued, they didn't know that there was a sky. They didn't know that there was a sun, and they didn't know that there was dirt. The day we rescued them, they had their world entirely changed. In a way, on that day alone, we changed 12 whole worlds. And since then, my organization has saved over 1,000 animals from factory farms, slaughterhouses, and other abusive situations. But I know the question that we all really want the answer to is how can we change the world, not just for 12 chickens or 1,000 other animals, but how can we change the world for every animal? How can we change the world at large? Unfortunately, the path to social change is incredibly complicated, and it is certainly not easy. But today I'm going to tell you some of what I do know, based on my study of past social justice movements, my study of social change theory, and perhaps most importantly, just my experiences as an activist. And I know that one of the most powerful ways that we can make strides towards changing the world for animals is through utilizing the power of making a scene. Now, who here has ever been told not to make a scene? I know I've certainly been told that many times, whether it's in my activism or just my brother and I being obnoxious in a fancy restaurant as kids getting yelled at by our parents. Perhaps in the context of animal rights activism, you've been told that we need to be quiet and polite and respectful when asking for change for animals. Perhaps you've been told that disruptive activism makes vegans look bad. Or perhaps you've even been told that nonviolent direct action and other disruptive tactics work for human issues, but that for some reason when it comes to issues facing non-human animals, it's just different. I've been told all of these things and more, and I'm here to tell you that all of that is nonsense. Of course, there are times when being a little more polite or a little more respectful makes sense. For example, if a politician has just agreed to meet with you, it probably doesn't make sense to disrupt their next speech. But there are still times when making a scene and being disruptive is incredibly important. This is me chained to a basketball hoop during an NBA playoff game between the Memphis Grizzlies and the Minnesota Timberwolves. My shirt says, "Glenn Taylor roasts animals alive." Glenn Taylor is the owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves basketball team. He's also the owner of Rembrandt Foods, a corporation that runs a factory egg farm in rural Iowa. When one hen at this egg farm tested positive for avian influenza, they roasted 5.3 million chickens alive. They killed them using an especially cruel killing method known as ventilation shutdown. Ventilation shutdown involves closing all of the ventilation in a barn, and raising the temperature super high so that all of the animals slowly suffocate and cook to death. And for roasting these 5.3 million chickens alive, Glenn Taylor received millions of dollars in taxpayer bailout money from the United States Department of Agriculture. So as part of a series of actions to demand that he take accountability, I chained myself to the basketball court. And we demanded that he step down from his role as owner of the Timberwolves and that he donate all of that taxpayer money to nonprofit animal sanctuaries. Pulling off this action was scary, and it was not easy. We had to sneak a 10-foot metal chain past security and past metal detectors. And then I had to sneak past more security and a police officer to make it onto the court. But tip for making a scene, acting like you belong somewhere goes a long way. So I was chained to the basketball court for a few minutes before they finally realized something was amiss. And at this point, this had been on national television. Hundreds of thousands of people had already seen it. And they eventually, they got the chain broken, and I was dragged. I was carried out of the stadium, and I was arrested, and I spent a night in jail in Memphis, Tennessee. This is my mugshot from that day. And when I got out of jail, I went online because I wanted to see what people were saying about the action. I wanted to read the media coverage. And for the most part, on my social media, people within the animal rights movement were very supportive and kind. But there were also comments like this. Comments from angry vegans telling me that I had hurt our movement. Vegans who, as far as I know, have never done any animal rights activism or any animal rescue work. And they were telling me that I had made vegans look bad, that I'd hurt animal rights. And what's so interesting to me about comments like this, which I get all the time for a number of work that I do, is that the reaction from the general public was actually the complete opposite of these vegans. For the most part, the general public was incredibly supportive. In fact, Timberwolves fans themselves have been incredibly supportive. To this day, I get messages on Twitter from Timberwolves fans asking me to disrupt their next game. But these people within our movement, it feels like they're my greatest enemy. And this action, it got so much attention. It was nationally televised, as I mentioned, so hundreds of thousands of people saw it on TV. Thousands of people saw it in the stadium. It was trending on Twitter. It received millions of views on social media. And we got major press coverage in outlets like USA Today and the Daily Mail. And yet I had hurt our movement. One interaction that'll always stick with me is the day after I got out of jail, I had to go to court. And when I got to court, there were all of these TV stations waiting outside my courtroom to interview me. And everyone was staring at me. They'd all seen my action, and they knew what I'd done. And for the most part, those people were all very supportive. Someone gave me a high five. But there were 3 women who were laughing, and they were making jokes about eating fried chicken. And I ignored them. But eventually, one of these 3 women called me over and asked to talk to me. So I went over to them, and they asked me why I'd done what I did. And so I told them. And the demeanor of these 3 women completely changed. They went from laughing to telling me that they agreed with me and that they supported what I did, and they were glad that I did it. And if I hadn't taken this action, that conversation never would have happened. Now, obviously, I didn't disrupt a basketball game just to have a conversation with 3 women. I could go outside and I could do that right now. But I hope and I believe that people all over the world were having similar conversations about the issues facing animals. And even if they were making fun of me while doing so, they were still talking about animal issues. And to me, that is a huge win. Because the reality is that this movement, it's not about us. It's not about any of us in this room. Unless there's a dog in this room, then it is about them. Because this movement is about the animals. And I think a better question to ask ourselves when we're doing disruptive activism is, am I making animals look bad? Am I belittling them in some way? Am I making a mockery of their suffering? I think those are better questions to ask, because the reality is that studies have shown that while the majority of people dislike protesters, they'll agree with them anyways. But people can't agree with us if they don't hear our message. So we have to make our message heard. Now, of course, doing actions like the one I did that get you arrested, that's not the only way to make a scene and get an issue on the table and get an issue talked about. Another great way to do that is through creative protests. Things that maybe at first seem bizarre and really grab people's attention. One example of a protest like that is a protest my friend Cassie King did outside of a Trader Joe's grocery store in Berkeley, California. We dumped real animal feces on the sidewalk outside of this grocery store, and she laid down in it. And I'm sure at this point you're all wondering what millions of people were wondering when they saw this action, which is, why? And I think what's so great about this action is that when you see it, it's so bizarre, and no one can fathom why a woman would voluntarily lay down and poop. So people are forced to ask why. And to answer this question, you need to learn about the egg industry, and specifically you need to learn about an investigation that Direct Action Everywhere conducted into a Trader Joe's egg farm, which found chickens being left to die in piles of feces. They had no food, no water, nowhere to rest, just poop. And this action, of course, faced criticism from a few angry vegans, but it got millions of views on social media, it went viral, and it received coverage in major media outlets. In addition to raising awareness, making a scene can also create immediate, concrete change. At my university, UC Berkeley, we have launched a campaign trying to get the dining halls to transition to a plant-based food system. My first day of school was fall 2020 during the pandemic, or the height of the pandemic. And over the summer, after I got accepted into UC Berkeley, I started to dig into what companies were supplying the dining halls. And I found that one of their suppliers was a company called Seaboard Foods. That was their pork supplier. And so I investigated a Seaboard Foods factory farm over the summer. And what we found was absolutely horrific animal cruelty, perhaps to this day, some of the worst animal cruelty I've ever seen. There was a disease spreading at this facility. And this disease was causing mother pigs in gestation crates to give birth prematurely. And mother pigs at factory farms, they're supposed to give birth in farrowing barns, not gestation barns. Gestation barns are barns where these mother pigs are in tiny gestation crates. They can't turn around. They can barely fit in the crates at all. And essentially, there's no room for piglets to go once they're born. So these piglets are getting crushed between the mother pigs, they're getting crushed under the mother pigs, and they're falling in the cracks of the floor and they're injuring themselves. And so from half a mile away from this facility, we could hear screams of pain and terror. So we released this investigation on the first day of school, and me and two other students locked down. We chained ourselves to the gate at the entrance of the UC Berkeley campus. And within a few hours, UC Berkeley announced that they would never again buy from Seaboard Foods. And since then, after a number of other actions and negotiations with the university, we've gotten them to drop several other factory farms, companies that have been exposed for criminal animal cruelty, and we've been continuing to put pressure on them to make progress. This is a protest that we did just about 2 weeks ago on the first day of school this year. We've done this protest a few times where we dye the fountain at the center of campus red to represent the blood of the animals abused to serve meat and other animal products in the dining halls. And we've kind of used this framing, drop factory farms, and in the United States, 99% of animal products come from factory farms, so that's essentially the same as saying you can't buy animal products because there's no way that they could do that without buying from factory farms. And these protests have received major attention across campus. People kind of call the dying of the fountain a canon event, and it gets a lot of attention on social media and other places every year. Now, I want to be clear that we're certainly not the first movement to engage in disruptive tactics, but I think all of you probably know that already. But one example is the Women's Social and Political Union, which was founded by Emmeline Pankhurst. It was a suffrage organization in the UK, and they were very disruptive. They made a lot of really big scenes. They would even throw rocks through windows. But one of my favorite things that they would do is when a politician was giving a campaign speech, a politician who didn't believe in women's suffrage, several women would plant themselves throughout the audience. And when he was about to make a key point, that triumphant moment where he expects everyone to cheer, a woman would stand up on her chair and she would yell, "Votes for women," or something along those lines. And she would get dragged out, beaten, maybe arrested, and that politician's moment would be ruined. But then he would carry on, thinking that it was over. Little does he know that several other women are still in the audience, and the next time he's about to make his next key point, another one is going to stand up and do the same thing, and so on and so forth. So these politicians couldn't have a successful campaign rally unless they supported women's suffrage, and it really put them in a tough spot. A lot of women, shockingly, were very opposed to these protests. Similar to our movement, they said things like, "You're making women's suffrage look bad. People aren't going to take us seriously." And also, there were concerns that these protests were leading towards violence towards the women who are participating in them. They were. Women would often be beaten. They'd often be arrested and abused in jail. Many women would be divorced by their husbands or kicked out of their homes, not allowed to see their children. But I want to go to a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. And he once said that we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open where it can be seen and dealt with. At UC Berkeley, I'm designing my own major on social change strategy. And last semester, I had a professor who explained nonviolent direct action in a way I never heard it explained before. She said that the purpose of nonviolent direct action is to create violence. And what she means by this is not that the intention of a protest is for the victims of the issue being protested to face more violence. Obviously, as animal rights activists, we don't want animals to be abused in response to our actions. That would be terrible. But what she means is that there's violence happening every second of every day. But for the most part, it is happening in a way where it is hidden. So let's bring it out into the open. When nonviolent protesters face violent repression from the police or from corporations, whoever it might be, it shows the violence of our system, of our power structure, in a way where it becomes undeniable. And I think that's what's so powerful. And I think, such an important thing about movement work, about social justice movements, is actually actively creating these cycles of contention. And cycles of contention are considered key to mobilizing people to fight for change. And a cycle of contention essentially means that we push, we fight for something, and that progresses our cause. And then we face retaliation, and that progresses our cause even more. And it's actually in those periods of retaliation and the periods after retaliation that we have the best opportunity to mobilize and expand our movement. I think a great example of this is the marches that took place in the civil rights movement from Selma to Montgomery, which were led by Martin Luther King Jr. Basically, in Alabama, Black people were being denied their right to vote. And obviously, that was a big problem. And people wanted to speak up about it. And so hundreds of civil rights activists gathered in Selma, and they began a march to Montgomery, to the Capitol, to exercise their right to vote in a very public display. They were stopped by police on this bridge here, and these nonviolent civil rights activists were beaten, pepper sprayed, severely injured by the police. They were completely brutalized. And this action, this day, became known as Bloody Sunday. But what a lot of people don't know about the Selma to Montgomery marches is that Martin Luther King Jr. actively chose this location because he knew that the sheriff there tended to be violent towards protesters. And I think a lot of the time in the animal rights movement and in other movements, we think, oh, that area, the police there, they're not very friendly, so let's go somewhere else. And while I think there are times when that's appropriate, for example, there might be times when you have activists with you who can't interact with the police for various reasons, perhaps immigration status or something like that. So while there are times when that makes sense, I think when it is possible to continue going to those places, it's so powerful. Because I think some of the most powerful scenes that we can make are scenes that are actually really made by the oppressors themselves. And this action, these marches were incredibly successful when these people were brutalized on live television. People who previously didn't really care about civil rights, they were moved to not only care, but to travel great distances to join these marches. And so these marches grew rapidly in size. And they're considered a turning point in the civil rights movement, and they're credited with the introduction of a voting rights bill in the Senate. And I think, I obviously have no problem with people being disruptive, shocker. But I think when we do something that's incredibly peaceful, something like just trying to cast a ballot or sitting down in a white-only restaurant, and those people face retaliation in this violent way, I think that's really powerful in highlighting the violence of our system. And again, it's really a scene made by the oppressors themselves. And I think in the animal rights movement, one example of this is actually rescuing animals. This is me holding Petunia, a baby chicken who I found collapsed on her back at a factory farm owned by Petaluma Poultry. She had a bloody injured wing, and she was slowly starving to death. And we rescued her. And we publicized her rescue on social media. And the rescue of little baby chickens like Petunia, it's incredibly threatening to animal agriculture. They do not like it. And I think, I want to be clear that the purpose of rescuing an animal, the animal should always come first. What's happening in animal agriculture and in other industries, it is absolutely horrible. And when you can get even 1, 2, or 3 of those animals out, it is so important, it is so powerful, even if no one ever hears about it. But when it is possible to rescue animals openly and publicly, it has the power to create even more far-reaching change. And it has the power to highlight the violence of our system when police officers and other law enforcement agencies crack down on animal rescue. Because who hates animal rescuers? Nobody. In 2019, I led a broad daylight open rescue at Reichardt Duck Farm, a factory duck farm in Sonoma County, California. Sonoma County is home to a number of major factory farms. And the police there have been very corrupted by their influence. So when we reported violations of animal cruelty law at Reichardt Duck Farm to Sonoma County law enforcement, they failed to act. They didn't do anything. And the animal cruelty that we found here was horrific. There were ducks dying from a disease called Remarella anatopestifer. They were dying without veterinary care. There were dumpsters filled with dead ducks. There were ducks being left to die with bleeding, gaping wounds. It was absolutely awful. But the police didn't do anything. So we took action ourselves. On June 3rd, 2019, we began to approach Reichardt Duck Farm, and we were followed by police who were set on stopping the rescue of animals. The police happened to make a wrong turn, and so we miraculously made it onto the property. And we were able to rescue 32 sick ducklings from one of the barns. As we were exiting the facility, which is when this photo was taken, there was a police helicopter flying above our heads, tracking our movements. But we made it off the property, and while we were providing emergency care to these 32 ducklings, dozens of police officers were lining up in riot gear outside of this factory farm, not to help the animals, but to arrest activists and prevent any other activists from going onto the facility to help more animals. And I think what's so powerful about this is that it shows the world that our system is so corrupt that the police care more about protecting profit than they do about sick little ducklings. You know, rescuing animals in broad daylight while live streaming it on social media and sending photos to the press, it makes a scene in and of itself. But when these police show up in riot gear and they crack down on these activists, it makes even more of a scene. And I think that's really powerful. And just yesterday, 2 of my friends started a criminal trial in Sonoma County. They're facing years in prison for the rescue that took place at Reichart Duck Farm and at another factory farm in Sonoma County called Sunrise Egg Farm, where we rescued 37 hens who were being criminally abused. And so it's a very complicated trial. Neither of the defendants actually touched an animal at either of these rescues, but they were kind of labeled as leaders by the prosecution, and so that's why they have been chosen to be prosecuted in this case. They could spend, I believe, up to 2 years in prison if they're found guilty, and they will be, if they're convicted, potentially convicted felons, which will greatly, restrict their rights. And, I think this is kind of a win in a way that we're facing this prosecution. Because one, it shows that animal agriculture is really threatened by what we're doing. And it also is going to draw so much attention to the criminal animal cruelty that's happening in Sonoma County. And it's going to draw so much outrage. Just on the first day of trial, so many people showed up to support animal rescue. Now, I know not everyone here is going to go out and start rescuing animals openly and publicly. I know not everyone here is ready to enter a felony trial, and that's okay. There are a few main reasons why I wanted to give this presentation today. One is because I really want to see more acceptance for disruptive activism within our movement. I think people who take part in disruptive activism face way too much flack from people who are supposed to be on their side. 2, I want to encourage more people to take part in disruptive activism because I think it's really important. And I think that if you are in a position to take sacrifice, to make sacrifices, if you are in a position to take legal risk and you're open to it, that you should really consider doing it. But if you're not in a position to take on legal risk, or if that's just something that you don't feel like you're in a place in your life that you're going to do that, I encourage you to see how you can support activists who are doing this type of work. Because there are so many roles, there's so much that goes into a disruption or an animal rescue like this one. We need people who are willing to take care of the animals. We need people who are willing to talk to the press, to edit videos, to drive people, to bring people food. There's so much you can do to support, even if you're not going to do it yourself. So I really want people to be encouraged to do that. And I also want everyone here to leave here inspired, because I believe that the most important thing in any movement is collective action. We're not going to win for animals if we don't take action together. So I want to end this presentation the same way I ended the first talk that I ever gave, which was at the National Animal Rights Day ceremony in San Francisco when I was 12 years old. And that day I said, "Behind closed doors, animals scream. Behind closed doors, blood pours onto the ground. Behind closed doors, animals die. Right now, a fluffy yellow chick is being ground up alive at an egg farm. Right now, a calf is being shot in the head at a dairy farm. Right now, a turkey is being hung up by her legs at a slaughterhouse. Right now, a piglet is being slammed against concrete because she didn't grow fast enough. Animals are dying every second of every day, just so their flesh, eggs, and milk can be eaten, so humans can wear their fur and skin, so we can watch them do silly tricks, and so we can do science experiments on them. But what could ever possibly make it okay to torture and murder others? Right now, terrible things are happening at animal farms everywhere. But right now, a rescued rooster crows. Right now, a liberated calf moos. Right now, a rescued turkey chirps. And right now, a happy pig snorts. And their voices are full of hope. Hope that the world might become a better place. And we must have this hope too. We need to truly believe in a world of love instead of hate and violence. We must believe in a world where we teach compassion towards all beings, rather than compassion towards some beings. We must take action to create a world where we can all live in peace. I have no doubts that we can get there.